Today we're painting this little painting right here. It's part of my 2 paintings, 1 palette painting series where we paint 2 different paintings with the exact same color palette. So grab everything you need and let's get started. This painting is part of our 2 paintings, 1 palette painting series. This is the first picture we're going to start with. I thought it was so cute because it has very soft pinks. It has this beautiful transition and also an area that might be a little bit challenging to create in watercolor. So we're going to start with this image right here. And then in the next video, I'll show you another way to use the same palette. So you can have 2 different pictures on the same page using the same palette. So let's grab everything that we need. I am using white gouache. I'm going to be using some Paynes gray, some ultramarine blue, permanent rose, and cadmium orange. So we're going to use cadmium orange to create that soft glow. So grab everything that you need. I'm also going to be using a few different brushes. So I am going to be using a size 6 Princeton Heritage brush. I'm also grabbing my brush, which is also a watercolor brush, but I use it for gouache. It's just a slightly inexpensive watercolor brush. This is the Artigra. You can get it on Amazon. This is a great brush as well. It's super affordable, and I think I got it in a big pack. This is great. I'm going to use it for my gouache because gouache has a little bit of chalk in it, and what happens over time is it'll kind of settle in the bristles down here and not necessarily damage your brush, but you don't want to deal with that. So grab a second brush if you have one. Otherwise, it's fine we're only using it for this little couple of stars and the moon. And then a larger brush that you can use, kind of a mop brush or something, maybe a size 10 or 12. This is a size 2 Da Vinci. You can use any large brush. It's just so that we can do these nice big gradients in the background. So that is all. And let's prep our paper. I have my picture out in front of me. I'll keep that to the side so you all can see it as we work right here. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I want to trace something. Since I'm going to have 2 different images here, I'm going to trace something so it's the same size. So even though this is very narrow, I'm actually going to use a wider picture or a wider template. This is one of my postcards that I sell. It is for one of my postcard painting kits of Yosemite. But there was a teeny tiny flaw, and I don't like this stuff to go to waste. So I'm using it as a template for tracing because that'll look really nice. So just trace whatever you have. You don't even have to trace a template. I like these rounded edges because they look really good, but if you don't want that, don't do it. Okay, that looks great. See how easy that was? When I did my original test right here, these 2 little quick tests, I actually traced this because it was around and it was small. So you can really grab anything. If you want to tape the edges, go for it. I don't think I'm going to be taping today. Am I? Okay, I'm going to do it just because. Why not? And I'm using 100% cotton watercolor paper. And I use a lot of the Canson watercolor paper, which is not 100% cotton, but it's great for practice. I do a lot of quick little paintings, and I like to be able to just get something down and not worry if oh gosh, the paper is going to cost me $2 a sheet. So sometimes when I am working on just, a quick little idea, I'll just go for the inexpensive stuff. And if it doesn't look perfect, like this is a great little sketchbook. It's very inexpensive. It's 100% cotton. It's not the most perfect paper ever, but you can see I'm able to test out my colors, test out the layering, and just get a general sense of how it's going to look. So that is my goal. And if I'm making something that is a little bit you know, more precious to me, then I'll move on to some nicer paper like this paper right here. It also really does just change the way that it looks. So, you know, some papers, the paint will sit on the surface. So if you're having troubles with something like that, then it could be the paper, because the paint will actually sit on the surface or absorb differently. Okay, this looks great. We're gonna get started. Now that I've taped everything down, I actually covered up that right-hand side since I'm gonna be painting a second painting later, and I don't want to have all of my oils, my hand kind of soaking into that paper. Now, obviously it's not that dramatic, but even something that's just on your fingers, the more you touch the paper, the more resistant your paper will be to the water. So I taped over that. I just kind of covered that up since I want to rest my hand on that because that's going to give me a lot more control. So there we go. Now that we have all of our things taped off, the first thing I'm going to do that I always like to do is identify where the sky meets the earth. So that's about right here. So it comes pretty close to the bottom of our image. So I'm going to just make a few marks on the tape, and that's another reason why we have the tape here, because it's going to help us identify how far down we need to make our sky. I'm just doing right on the edges. I don't even need to draw on here. If you want to, you can, but I'm not going to. Now what I'm going to do is take my big brush, a mop brush, anything that is at least a size 10 or above, and I'm going to wet the surface all the way down to that line. Okay, I'm not worrying about, you know, the edge of that silhouette of the mountain or hill back there. I'm just going to paint all the way down. And let's put this here so you can see that. So let's wet the surface. And as I've said in the past, sometimes if you have your student grade paper, give it one pass with your water, and then after it kind of seeps in, give it another pass with wetting the surface. Just because what happens is with that, you know, more inexpensive paper, the water kind of just sits on the surface. So when you add the paint, it doesn't flow and soften like a nice 100% cotton paper would. This is 100% cotton, so I am just going to make sure that there's plenty of water. And now I'm going to start out with the darkest area and work my way down. Okay, so with this picture, it is this nice, beautiful blue, a little bit of pink, and then, you know, they'll mix to create a purple, and then we'll add orange. And that pink is really a barrier, so we won't get any, you know, greens or anything like that. So I'm using a little bit of my ultramarine blue, and if I want to dull it down just a touch, because it isn't totally bright blue, I'm going to add a little bit of Paynes gray because it has some blue in it. That just dulls it down just a little bit. So I'm getting that blue. While the surface is wet, I'm going to put a nice little stripe on the top and just see how dark that is. That's pretty close. Now, if it's spot on, you actually want your paint to be a little bit darker, because when it dries, everything in watercolor dries lighter. So make sure that you just grab a little extra paint if it's lighter than, or if it's equal to the color that you see here, because it will, remember, it will dry dark or lighter, excuse me. Not enough coffee this morning. All right, that looks good. I'm going to drag that down. I'm going to wash my brush just a little bit. I'm not dragging this all the way down. I just want to stop it about there. And if it gets too dark too fast, I'll wash that brush out and kind of lift and push it back. That's how you make a nice soft gradient anyways. And now what I'm going to do is grab my permanent rose over here. I get plenty of that. And I like to swatch things just to see how bright it is or concentrated. And I'm going to start right below where I left off. And pull it down just a little, and then I'm going to push it back. And I'm going to go up, 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 and stop once it turns purple. And I'm going to bring it down a little bit just to soften it. That's looking great. Now I'm going to wash my brush out, making sure that this bottom is still moist. And I'm going to grab that cadmium orange. And I always pull the color out on my tray, just like I'm doing here, because it's easier to see. And I even will pull it out so I can see it like this, and then also swatch it so that I know how concentrated that paint is. Because one of the hardest things in watercolor is to know how much paint you have on your brush. So these are two different steps I take before I actually go to my paper. Now, this is the trick with this. This is incredibly light. So it goes pink to this kind of pinky orange and then solid orange almost. So you have to maintain this lightness by keeping the white of your paper. So I'm actually going to leave a strip of just white showing. Then I'm going to add my orange and blend up. Oops, I kind of lied there. Let me lift it. So if that happens to you, give it a soft lift. This is a clean brush. And I'm just gonna lift some of that out of there because you really wanna maintain that lightness because it'll make it look kind of yellow like it does. And then just kind of skip over that light area and mix it into the pink. You can even mix a little bit on your tray, but you don't wanna mix it too much on your tray because then it starts to get dark. All right. This is kind of crinkling down here because this is very dry. I'm just going to soften that edge because I don't really want to see that. There. And I'm going to push it back up because I really want to maintain that nice brightness. And I want a little bit more pink in that orange. There we go. Kind of right at the edge. There. Looking pretty good. Nice. Add a little bit more orange because remember, it is going to get lighter as it dries. That's good. I don't want to fiddle too much, especially once you have this up here, don't fiddle. So it's very tempting to look at it and go, oh no, it's not dark enough. It's not strong enough. But the thing that's going to happen is that you're going to create cauliflower effect, the cauliflower effect. So just leave it. That's why I mentioned earlier when we first started that, you know, even though you might match a color, you actually want to match it one shade darker because it's going to dry lighter. Let's let that dry and then we'll mix up our next color, which is this kind of orangey brown and some of these pinks for whatever this is, the grasses. So let's let that dry. So leave it, and when we come back, we will keep working on our beautiful hills and that grass. My sky is just about dry, so now I'm gonna mix up my color for that mountain in the background. And I'm using my size 6 brush. You want to use this because you're going to have a lot more control to create any kind of detail. So definitely use something like that. Just making sure it's wet. And I'm going to grab a little bit of our, whoa, that still had a bunch of red blue in it. Yikes. Grab a little bit of that cadmium orange, mix it into that dirty part of your tray because we're going to add some pink to it anyways. Orange is our base color, and we're going to add a tiny bit of pink first to start. Warm it up to kind of more of a red. A little bit more of that pink. Remember, we're only using those colors I mentioned. You can always add anything else that you want, but this is just really good practice in color mixing. So now that I've added my pink to my orange, I'm going to grab a tiny bit of Paynes gray, and you can tell that immediately that Paynes gray with its blue is going to bring it down into a nice brown. Just to show you what that looks like. That's pretty good. I think that's looking great. Now, since that mountain is a little bit further in the background, what you can do is take a little bit of that color that you just mixed up, add a little bit of blue to it, and immediately that's going to dull it down. You see the difference there? So one brown was really warm, the other is cool. So that's more of what you're looking for, but keep that color because we're going to build that up towards the front. And I'm watering it down because anything that's in the background, anything that recedes into space is going to be bluer and lighter in color. Okay, now you're going to, as long as this is dry or mostly dry, you're going to paint this first layer. And you're gonna paint all the way down. And remember, those are our marks. We're gonna go over what we painted, and that's fine. So it kind of comes up, down, and kind of wiggles out. I can't quite see it. And then immediately paint that and drag it out. There we go. I'm gonna just use a little bit of water because when you use the small brush, you can't kind of flood the area as quickly, which is good and bad. There, that looks great. I kind of want that to be a little bit bigger. Now that that's drying, I'm going to show you how we can mix up this color for our grass. Now, at first glance, you know, the grass, you're thinking, well, that's kind of this tan or brown color. But if you look really carefully, it's very pink. And the way that this picture was taken, maybe it even amplified that. Maybe whoever took this picture. So I'm actually going to use more of my pink into that brown to make some of these tops. And we're going to paint the tops of those first. We're going to drag down the stem, and then we're going to deepen up each one of those colors. So I'm taking a little bit of that pink, and I'm going to mix it into the color that brown I just created. And let's show you. Okay, that's pretty dang close. So that is mostly pink, a little bit of orange, and a tiny bit of Paynes gray to dull it down, okay? And I'm looking at my first line. It starts at about here, and I'm gonna kind of flick it up and bring it down. And don't do too many because you don't want it to get really dark really fast. I'll do the second one, and as I use up some of this paint in my brush, I'm going to add a few more of these. Let's do that one. And they kind of just curve up. So now with that same leftover paint that's in my brush, I'm just going to water it down just a touch, and I'm going to create the lines to go right below those. And I'm bringing it almost down to the bottom. You can drop in a few more with this light color, a few more of these little bits. Kind of fill it out. This is our first layer of our grasses, and what we're going to do is just mix up a little bit more of that color. So as your paint dries on your palette, that's actually good because it gets more concentrated and you don't have to mix it back up. So I'm just going to roll my brush in this darker brown pink, and I'm going to add it to the base of these grasses, the base of the top right down here, and I'm going to add a couple more lines. And some of those that are you know, appear to be further away are kind of duller and darker. So you can add some Paynes gray, and that will help kind of push those back a bit. Start light though, so a little, make that color, mix it up, but then water it down because you don't want it to get too dark too fast. Darkening it up. What we're going to do is let it dry, and we're going to start building up these darker colors and grasses down below. Before you do that though, if yours looks really light and sparse, whoops, like mine, what you're going to do is kind of fill that in with just a few more stalks. You don't even have to do the top of the grass, but just kind of a few more lines just to fill it up so that it doesn't look so sparse. There. We are going to add a little bit of Paynes gray to that brown that we created. And we're going to first start by creating just a chunk of this darker color, just like we did the mountain. So we created a silhouette of that mountain or hill in the background first, and then we layered up. We're going to do the same thing right here. So you just need to add a little bit of Paynes gray to the brown that you created, and we're going to paint directly, kind of a wiggly section, and just fill it in. This one you don't want to dissipate and make lighter. You want it to maintain that same color throughout the whole area. There. Now we're going to build up some of these darker grasses, so you can add more Paynes gray to your brown. If you don't have any more brown, mix up the brown first before you add your Paynes gray. Now that the paper is pretty much dry, I can add these final layers. I'm going to add the details in the grass, and I'm going to make this a little bit more random and not totally finished. So what I mean by that is that some of these grasses are broken. That's going to make it look either bent or in the back of another grass. So don't make them, you know, you can make some that are full and together like that one, but you want, you know, you're using this dark color as more of a shadow rather than, you know, the main color. And I'm going to do a few shadows, so you can drop in a couple of triangles here and there or diamonds, and that's going to kind of make it look like, you know, there's an area or cluster where it's dark. Not bad. Let's add a little more. I'm going to cover up some of those clusters. Let it dry a little bit. I think we're done. And obviously you can keep going as much as you want with the detail, but sometimes less is more when it comes to watercolor. Sometimes it's nice to just let it be, let it sit. You can always go back to a painting, you know, in a few weeks and then fiddle. So let's take that tape off. You can see the final reveal. You can wait for the next painting, or you can take it off right now. There we go. I'm gonna leave this covered though. Keep your tape on your other one. Looking pretty good. I forgot, we've got one last thing to do. So we need to make our tiny sliver of a moon. Grab your brush, get it wet, grab some of that white gouache. You could also use a white gel pen for this as well. And all I'm gonna do, I don't want the paint to be super, super light, otherwise it's gonna look fake, right? And I'm gonna just make a tiny little sliver just like that. And this is definitely dry, so I'm gonna go ahead and add that. I knew I was forgetting something. Let's see, I don't want it right smack dab in the middle. There we go. That's it. You can drop a few stars in if you like. I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger. And just do just some really faint ones, because this means that, you know, the moon is just barely out. So you're not gonna see much. There. Now it's done. Looking good. All right, on to the next one.